She collapsed beside the road. The sun was falling behind the dusty hills of Earth Colony 5. The wind blew dry leaves across the empty road. There were no houses nearby, just rocks, trees. Silence. A tall, thin figure walked slowly along the side of the road. Her legs shook with every step. Her skin was pale blue, bruised and dirty. Her black hair stuck to her cheeks, messy and dry. Her eyes looked straight ahead, but she didn't really see anything. Her name was Karina. She had been walking for 3 days without food. Her clothes were torn and her feet were bleeding. Every time she passed a human car, it drove by fast. No one stopped. Some even rolled up their windows when they saw her. She didn't blame them. She smelled bad, she looked worse, she was an alien, and most aliens like her weren't welcome anymore. Not after the war. Karina's legs gave out. She collapsed beside the road. Her knees hit the gravel hard. She didn't cry. She was too tired for tears. She lay there, her chest slowly rising and falling. In her hand, she still held a small round stone. It was smooth, black, warm from the sun. It was the only thing she took when she ran from the slave camp. The only thing left from her home. Suddenly, footsteps approached. A human man stood nearby. He was tall, with a rough beard and a bag of tools hanging from his belt. His name was Jake. He had seen her from the road and stopped walking. He stared at her, unsure. Karina looked up at him. Her lips trembled. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Just a whisper, a weak breath. Jake didn't speak right away. He looked around. No one else was there. Then he knelt beside her. "You, all right?" he asked. She didn't answer. She didn't understand his words, but the kindness in his voice, she understood that. He slowly reached for her arm. She flinched, but didn't fight. He checked her pulse. "You're burning up." She was sick, weak, maybe dying. Jake sighed. "Damn it. Okay. You can't stay out here." He looked at the empty hills again. Then he picked her up. Karina was too light, too cold. Jake carried her in his arms, carefully stepping over rocks and roots. His stone house was not far, just half a mile into the hills. He had built it, himself, with sweat and strength. He liked being alone. No noise, no city, no people. And now, he was bringing a stranger into it. A stranger not even human. His house was small but strong, made from local stone with a wood roof and a warm fire inside. Jake laid her down on the bed near the fireplace. He placed a blanket over her and added wood to the fire. She didn't move. He brought water in a metal cup and touched it to her lips. She drank, just a little, but enough to stay alive. Jake looked at her. Her face was thin. Her arms were full of small scars. Her body was shaking. He shook his head. "What happened to you?" She held the small black stone tightly in her hand even while sleeping. Jake took a chair and sat near the bed. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know where she came from. He just knew that she needed help. And for some reason, he didn't want to leave her alone. That night, Karina opened her eyes slowly. The firelight danced on the stone walls. She felt warmth. She felt a roof above her and a human watching her quietly. She didn't understand this world, but in that moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safety. She closed her eyes again and held the stone tighter. Tomorrow, she would ask herself why he helped her. But tonight, she just let herself sleep. A roof of stone. The next morning, light slipped through the small window. Birds chirped outside. The fire had died down, but the room still felt warm. Karina opened her eyes slowly. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then she saw the stone walls, the thick blanket, the wooden roof above her head. It wasn't a prison, it wasn't a slave camp. It was something else. A sound came from the corner. Jake was fixing a cracked stone wall with bare hands. His shirt was off, showing old scars on his back. He worked like someone who had done this 100 times before. Stone, sweat, silence. Karina tried to sit up but winced in pain. Jake turned quickly. "You're awake," he said, walking over. "Good." He handed her a cup of warm broth. She looked at it, then at him. Slowly, carefully, she took it with both hands and drank. It burned her dry throat, but it was the best thing she had tasted in months. Jake pointed to himself. "Jake," he said. Then he pointed to her. Karina blinked. She pointed to herself and whispered, Karina." He smiled a little. "Karina," he repeated. She gave a weak nod. Jake stood and looked around the room. "You need a safe roof. This one leaks. I'll fix it today." She didn't understand his words, but when he looked up and then mimed water dripping, she understood. He was going to fix the house. For her. Outside, Jake gathered heavy stones from the nearby stream. Karina sat by the door, watching. He built carefully, using both hands and knees, locking stones into place without cement. He used a strange old method, ancient but strong. Karina stood slowly and walked over. Her feet were bare and shaking, but she knelt beside him. She picked up a small stone and placed it where she thought it should go. Jake stopped, looked at her. She stared back. He gave a single nod. They worked, side by side, slowly, silently. She watched how he pressed the stones together. She copied his movements. Her hands were soft, unused to work. But she wanted to help. Because this place, it was beginning to feel like a home. That night, Karina lay on the bed again. The roof above her was whole now. Not one drop of water came through when the rain started outside. Jake sat by the window with a book in his hand, but he wasn't reading. He was thinking. She was strange. Not just alien, but different from others he had met during the war. She didn't ask for anything. She didn't speak much. But she watched everything. She listened. Jake stood and walked to a small shelf. He brought something back and placed it beside her pillow. It was a smooth black stone, just like hers. Karina looked at it, eyes wide. "It reminded me of yours," Jake said softly. She picked it up with shaky fingers. Then, with both stones in her hand, she placed them side by side on the table next to her. 2 stones. One from her broken past, and one from her new beginning. She looked up at Jake and said a new word. A word he didn't expect to hear. Home. Jake blinked. He sat down beside her and nodded. Yeah, home. Why she ran from her planet. Karina woke up to the smell of cooked bread. Her body still ached, but the pain was less. She sat up slowly and looked at the small stone house. It felt calm, safe. Jake handed her a warm slice of bread. She took it with both hands. No words were needed. Outside, the wind howled through the hills. The sky looked dark, like a storm was coming. Karina stood near the window. As lightning flashed, she touched her neck. A scar ran across it, hidden under her collar. Her hands shook. Jake noticed. He didn't ask. But he brought a stick and drew a circle in the dirt floor, then pointed to it. Your planet? He asked. She nodded slowly. Then she picked up the stick and began to draw inside the circle. She drew a mountain, then a river, then tall buildings, broken, burning. Her hand trembled. Then she drew a cage. And in the cage, herself. Jake sat on the floor beside her, quiet. She kept drawing. Tiny figures with weapons, long whips, aliens in uniforms. Humans, too. Some with guns, some just watching. Karina pressed her finger hard into the dirt and made dots, tears. Then with her fingertips she erased half the drawing, as if fire had eaten everything. She pointed to the last part she drew, a small stone, and held up the black rock she always kept. Her eyes were red. Jake finally understood. She didn't just run. She escaped. From a camp, from chains, from death. Later, that night, rain slammed against the roof. Karina sat near the fire, wrapped in a blanket. Her eyes stared into the flames. She whispered in her own language, words Jake couldn't understand, but they sounded like names, maybe of people she lost. She reached into her pouch and pulled out something hidden behind the black stone, a piece of faded cloth, blood-stained, burned, torn. She handed it to Jake. He opened it slowly. There was a mark on it, some kind of symbol. Half burned. She pointed to it, then to herself. Jake realized it was the symbol of her people. Maybe her family, or maybe a tribe now gone. He folded the cloth and gave it back. "No one's gonna hurt you here," he said. She didn't know the words, but the way he said them. She smiled just a little. Later, as she lay in bed, Jake watched her from the doorway. He now knew. She wasn't just some lost creature from another world. She was a survivor, and the world she came from had tried to erase her. But she was still here, because she held on to a stone, because something inside her refused to die, because now, in a small house built from stone, she was starting to live again. The soldier comes knocking. Karina was learning fast. She could now say small words in English. Fire, stone, food, and one word she loved most, home. Jake showed her how to hold tools, how to use her strength. He gave her gloves and a place to work beside him. She had never smiled before. Now, sometimes she did. But peace never stays forever. One cold morning, just after sunrise, a shadow appeared near the stone house. Jake stepped out with a mug of hot tea and stopped in his tracks. A soldier stood at the edge of his land, dressed in gray armor, boots covered in mud. His helmet reflected the light. His hands rested on a blaster at his side. Karina saw him through the window. Her blood turned cold. She dropped the mug she was holding. Jake walked toward the soldier. Calm, careful. "Can I help you?" he asked. The soldier didn't smile. "We're doing a sweep, looking for unauthorized refugees. An alien female escaped from Sector 9. Dangerous. Possible ties to rebellion." Jake's jaw tightened. "Haven't seen anyone like that." The soldier looked past him, toward the cabin. "Mind if I take a look inside?" Jake blocked the path. "I do mind. This is private land." The soldier smirked. Refusing inspection could be seen as helping fugitives. Jake didn't move. "Got a warrant?" Silence. The soldier finally backed off. "We'll be watching. She's dangerous. They always are." He turned and walked away. Inside, Karina was hiding behind a wall. Her knees were pulled to her chest. She was shaking, breathing fast. Jake entered and gently crouched in front of her. "He's gone." She looked up with wet eyes. "Safe," he said, pointing to the stone walls. Then he pressed a hand to his chest. "Me. Safe." She reached out and touched his hand with hers. Then, with her finger, she wrote in the dirt floor, "Again. You risk." Jake gave a small smile. "Worth it." That night, Karina couldn't sleep. She stared at the roof, at the black stone in her hand. She thought of chains, of screaming, of the brands burned into her skin. The soldier would return, or worse, bring more. She couldn't bring danger to Jake, but when she tried to leave in the middle of the night, Jake was already waiting at the door. "Don't," he said. She looked down. "You're not running anymore," he told her. "Not here." Karina's throat trembled, but she nodded. Jake handed her something, a sharp tool, a carving chisel. She looked at it with wide eyes. Then he pointed to the stone wall. "Mark it," he said. "Make it yours." The next day, Karina carved a symbol onto the wall near the door. It matched the half-burned symbol on her cloth. A curl, a star, and a stone. She touched it softly when she was done. That wall, that home, was hers now. No soldier could erase that. She builds with him. The days passed slowly, but peacefully. No more soldiers came. The sky turned clear. The hills smelled of warm soil and fresh stone. Karina stood beside Jake outside the cabin. In her hands, she held a tool, a small hammer. Her gloves were too big, but she had asked to help. Not with food, not with cleaning. She wanted to build. Jake smiled and pointed to the half-broken wall near the back of the house. "We'll fix this one today." Karina nodded. They worked together. Jake showed her how to choose the right stone, how to stack them, how to listen to the sound when two stones touched. A sharp click meant it would stay strong. She listened. She learned. Her hands became rough, her arms stronger, and for the first time in her life, she felt useful. Later, while they rested under a tree, Karina looked at her hands. They were dirty, bruised, but she smiled at them. "These," she said slowly, "are good hands." Jake looked at her. "Yeah, they are." Inside the house, she began decorating the walls with small carvings, a flower, a river, a symbol from her past. Every line was made with care. The cold gray stone slowly turned warm with her touch. This wasn't just a place to sleep anymore. It was becoming hers. One day, rain came again. But this time, no water leaked through the roof. Karina watched the drops run down the windows while she sipped hot tea. Her shoulders were not shaking anymore, her eyes were calm. Jake sat beside her. Outside the world was wet and cold, but inside, it was dry and safe and alive. Later, she placed her 2 black stones by the fire, one from her old life, one Jake had given her. Then she picked up a 3rd stone, a small one, shaped like a heart. She carved a tiny line into it and placed it between the other 2. Jake noticed. "What's that one?" he asked. Karina smiled softly. "Future." He looked at her, surprised. She didn't say much, but when she did, it meant something. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, at the walls they had built, at the fire she had lit. He had lived in this house for years, but now, it felt different. Stronger, warmer, alive. Not because of the stone, because of her. And just outside the window, deep in the woods, something watched from the dark. Yellow eyes blinked. A voice spoke into a communicator. "We found her. They try to take her again." The morning was quiet, too quiet. Karina was outside planting wild herbs near the stone wall. Her hands were dirty, her face calm. She had never planted anything before. Now she was helping life grow. Jake chopped wood nearby. Birds sang in the trees. Everything felt normal, until the wind changed, and with it came footsteps, heavy, fast, not alone. Jake looked up. Karina froze. Something was wrong. 3 men appeared through the trees. Bounty hunters, not soldiers. Worse, they wore mismatched armor, long coats, and cruel smiles. One carried a net launcher. Another held a scanner that beeped as it pointed at Karina. "Target confirmed," one said. "She's worth 10,000. Karina backed away slowly. Jake stepped in front of her. "She's under protection. Leave." The leader laughed. "She's property, human, a living asset. You're just a stone-hugging fool." Jake gritted his teeth. "She's not a thing." "She's not yours," the man growled. Jake raised his axe. The net fired. Karina screamed. The net flew toward her, but Jake jumped between. The net wrapped around him, not her. He crashed to the ground. Karina's eyes went wide. She ran to him, tried to untangle the ropes, but the hunters were closing in fast. One pulled out a shock stick. Jake groaned, barely able to move. "Run!" Karina stood up. She didn't run. She looked at the stone wall they built. She looked at the carvings. She looked at the black stones. And for the first time in her life, she refused to be taken. She picked up a shovel, hands shaking, heart racing. One hunter stepped forward. Smirking, Karina swung. Crack! The man dropped like a bag of bones. The second came at her. She dodged and smashed the tool into his side. He screamed. The third raised his gun, but Jake, still tangled in the net, grabbed his leg and pulled hard. The man fell. His gun hit the dirt. Karina kicked it far away. She stood over him, shovel in hand, breath heavy. He raised his hands. Okay, okay. Jake looked up at her, blood on his forehead, eyes wide. She wasn't the scared girl he found on the road. Anymore, she was strong. She was fighting for her home. They tied up the hunters and called a small village ranger post. They were trespassing, Jake said coldly, and assaulting. The rangers arrived an hour later and took them away. One tried to explain, calling Karina illegal. Jake stepped in. She's mine, he said, voice firm. My builder, my partner. She has a place here. The officer looked at Karina, then at Jake. He nodded. That night, Karina sat beside the fire, her head on Jake's shoulder. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She just sat in silence, fingers gently brushing the small heart-shaped stone. She looked at Jake. I fight, she said. Jake smiled softly. Yeah, you did. She paused, then added one more word. For us. Stone house, warm heart. The sun rose over the hills. The storm was over. No soldiers, no hunters, no fear, only quiet wind, and the sound of two people rebuilding together. Jake sat on the porch cleaning an old tool. His arm was bandaged, his face still bruised from the fight, but his eyes were calm. Inside the stone house, Karina was doing something special. She wasn't cleaning. She wasn't resting. She was building something new. She used leftover stone pieces, smoothed each one, carved carefully, focused. Jake peeked through the window. What are you making? Karina looked up, smiled gently. You see, soon. By afternoon, she stepped outside and called him over. In front of the house where the path began, she had built a small round monument. Made of different stones, gray, black, red, even blue. At the center was a hand-carved sign. Jake read it slowly. Home of Karina and Jake, built from stone and trust. He stared. His throat tightened. Karina stood beside him, holding a small piece of wood with two carved handprints, one hers, one his. She pressed it onto the top of the monument. Then she looked at him and asked quietly, Can I stay? Jake didn't answer with words. He opened his arms. She stepped into them, and the two stood there, still as the mountains. Weeks passed. Karina learned more words. She laughed more. She planted a garden. Jake built an extra room. Not because they needed it, but because it felt right. One evening, a government officer came again. Not to take her, but to offer her something: papers, status, a legal name, a place. She looked at Jake nervously. He nodded. Only if you want it. Karina smiled and signed with her name. Not as a lost alien, but as a citizen, a builder, a woman with a home. That night, they sat outside under the stars. Karina held the same black stone she once clung to in fear. She placed it beside the two others on the table. Then she added a fourth. Jake raised an eyebrow. Another one? She pointed to it. For tomorrow, he smiled. Planning ahead? She nodded. Together. In the stone house warmed by fire and love, the past had finally become quiet. Karina had no chains, no more cages, no more running. Just a roof of stone, a heart of trust, and a place she could finally call home.